listening to the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For today's episode, I had the honor of interviewing Ronald Kimmons. Ronald is the author of the novella Den of the Wolfman and the soon-to-be-released novel Wild River. During this interview, we had a very interesting discussion about how Ronald approaches writing as a Christian and how I approach writing as an atheist. I'm here with Ronald Kimmons. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Kimmons, yeah, Kimmons, like Simmons with a K.
Okay. Author of Den of the Wolfman and coming early next year, Wild River. Ronald, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Hi, Aaron. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
So I am a father of 5. My wife and I, we were up until recently, we had our own, we were operating a marketing agency together. That agency is still operating, but she's kind of taking over that, and I'm moving into being a full-time novelist, and because that's what I've always wanted to do. Ever since I was young, since I was a little kid and writing stories, I used to actually won writing competitions when I was a kid, in my school, and that made me really excited at the time. And I've always been very imaginative. I always wanted to be a writer, and throughout my professional life, I've been writing on the side a lot, a lot of short fiction, things like that. And a lot of my work that I've done has been writing, writing marketing copy, writing website content, done a lot of translation. I'm multilingual. I worked in translation for a few years. But all those things were fine, and I enjoyed them. But what I really wanted to do the whole time was to be a novelist. And so that's where I am now. And being a very imaginative person, I'm right now I'm writing fantasy. I'll probably write some science fiction, also realistic fiction in the future. But right now I'm writing fantasy, and that's what I'm doing because that's what I want to do.
Okay, now, how did your career path as a content writer, translator, and marketing agency owner prepare you to become a novelist?
So, when I graduated from college, I started writing website content. And I did a lot of work for Demand Media, which was it was a what they call a content mill, and I had to learn, because writers for Demand Media weren't paid very much. I had to learn to be able to crank out a lot of content, and that actually helped me a lot. It helped me to train myself to write efficiently and quickly, and to organize my thoughts in a very fast-paced manner, right? And I was frequently writing 6,000 words or more a day, and I think that gave me a lot of practice in writing, and I admit it wasn't the best writing, but it helped me to really hone my skills as a writer by giving me a lot of practice, and also being a translator. And translating from multiple languages, that really helped me to, I feel, get a better grasp on my language, on English, and how it works, and in a way that you don't really get when you only speak one language. When you start learning other languages, that gives you a little more objectivity, helps you to understand your native tongue kind of from an outside perspective. And it causes you to notice things that you wouldn't notice otherwise, and it really makes you more cognizant of the mechanics and the nuances of the language in a way that maybe you otherwise wouldn't notice. And again, it also just, of course, translation just involved a lot of writing, so it really helped me to continue to hone my skills, and to write clearly and legibly, and in a way that people would actually be able to follow. And yeah, so and of course going on into marketing writing. And the funny thing about marketing writing is it's completely different from like academic writing or fiction writing, and even website even general website content writing, because writing for marketing, like writing email campaigns, writing sales letters, things like that, it's very different. And I had to relearn a whole lot about writing, and I had to and it's kind of funny because I had to break myself of doing things that I had been taught to do in college and in my other professional pursuits. And in many ways, I know that a lot of serious writers are just really annoyed by marketing writing. And I know that I was. But I feel that it still helped me, in that it helped me to be able to get better at speaking with another voice. I would need to look at who my client was, what they were trying to sell, look at what the target market was, and think about the voice that I needed to use to communicate this message in a way that was most palatable, most easily accepted by the audience. And it's a difficult thing to do. But that experience really helped me to hone that ability to be able to speak with different voices. And of course, after having done that, now here I am moving into fantasy writing.
Now, without spoiling too much of your book that's currently out now, what is your novella Den of the Wolfman about?
So it is a supernatural thriller, and it's a fantasy thriller. Supernatural implies fantasy, and it's set in what you would call a steampunk era. We're thinking like 1860s, and it's in a different world, fantasy world, but it's based on 1860s America. And to put it simply, the main character is kind of a Sherlock Holmes sort of character, a little more down to earth, except for the fact that he has certain special abilities. And these abilities help him in his investigations. And the investigation that he is engaging in the story is an investigation where he's chasing after a serial killer. He had a private client come to him and hire him to chase a serial killer. And he has to use his abilities, his special abilities, to do that. But there's a danger in using those abilities, because there's the possibility that he can lose himself in doing this. So he has to balance his desire to catch the killer, to stop the killings, against his desire of self-preservation. And of course, he also has to face down this killer, who is a terrifying person.
Now, when is your upcoming novel Wild River expected to release? And without spoiling too much of it, what is it about?
And so it releases in January, and it actually follows the same character, the same main character. The main character in Den of the Wolfman is Bondas Riverman, and his story continues into Wild River. And I actually wrote Wild River first, and I'm still putting the finishing touches on it. But after having written Wild River, and in that story it mentions how he tracked down the Wolfman, and that's how he kind of gained some local acclaim from doing that. And I thought, that would be an interesting story to tell, so I'll go ahead and write a novella as a prequel to my novel. And so that's what I did. I went back and wrote the novella and made that available. But his story continues after dealing with the Wolfman. You see him get hired, actually, by 3 different people on the same day to find the same person who has gone missing. And none of these people know each other. And there's a lot of mystery as far as why they all came, as far as why they are all interested in finding this person. Of course, they all came to him because he's a bit famous, because he tracked down the Wolfman. But why do they all want to find this person? Because they're all from very different walks of life. One person who comes to him is just a factory worker. Another one, and the other 2 are members of 2 rival rich families, and neither knows that the other is coming to him. And so Bondus is thrown into this scenario where he has to find this person who's seemingly unimportant, and yet all these people want him to find her. And he's also having to deal with the dynamics of the rich local families and organizations fighting against each other in an environment that's very chaotic, where the local police are very they aren't very effective, and so it's a very chaotic environment, and there's a lot of fighting, a lot of mystery, and that's kind of a messy summary of what Wild River is about.
Now, normally this would be the part of the interview where I would ask if your books are self-published or traditionally published, but there was an interesting question prompt on your Podmatch page. Mm-hmm. And this question prompt was, why do you believe that literary agents and traditional publishing houses are no longer necessary? I was paraphrasing that question prompt a little bit, I believe.
Well, it's because, and I don't want to be too unfair. I think if you want to go the traditional route, you can. I mean, that's fine. But I don't think it's necessary. And the reason for that is, first, I come from a marketing background. And for me in particular, I don't see very much value in going and sending out hundreds of letters to publishing houses, when instead I could be taking that energy and putting it toward just marketing directly to readers. And the internet gives us so many tools to build our own following, to continue to engage with our own following, and also to sell different offers easily to that following once we build it, to the point where I just don't see where agents and traditional publishers are necessary in that anymore. Of course, if you don't want to do any of that, if you don't want to do all that marketing and all the legwork that I'm doing right now, trying to build a following, then okay, go traditional. But it just seems to me that either way it's going to be a lot of work. Because even if you go traditional, you still have to get a publisher. You have to convince a publisher to publish you, which in itself is very difficult. And then once they do, they still expect you to do a lot of marketing. So I think I just prefer to take the direct approach and build the marketing machine myself and do it myself.
Yeah, I'm someone who is going the self-publishing route with a number of books I'm currently working on, and your points about how the internet has made it infinitely easier to self-publish works. Self-publishing was actually kind of rare before the internet came along.
They called it vanity publishing.
Really.
Yeah. They called it vanity publishing because that's supposedly that was the only good for it, was just publishing out of vanity, because no one would ever make any money that way, supposedly. And it was a lot harder, I'm sure. But now it's with the resources that we have that are available, it has become a lot easier.
Yeah, and you're noting that even if authors go the traditional route, they still have to do a lot of their own marketing. For a self-published author, that comes easier to a self-published author, because they're writing under the expectation that they'll have to market. Do all the marketing.
Right.
Now, if you have a typical writing routine, what is that like?
Oh, I basically, I have 5 kids in the house, so routines don't always go the way I like, but and my wife is also working full time. And so I kind of have to go around her schedule as well. But I get up, I exercise in the morning, and I'm usually writing by 9 a.m. And I try to get at least 5 hours of writing in a day. And a lot of the time, I actually go and take my laptop and go to the park, the playground. I take my 2 youngest children to the playground and let them play while I write. And actually, that ends up being pretty effective. I'll take them like to Chick-fil-A or McDonald's and play on the playground while I write. But yeah, I sort of have a routine, and I would have a stronger routine if I didn't have 5 kids. But I do have 5 kids. The oldest is 12. So routines very easily go out the window.
And also, you're from Arizona, where most days of the year it's not raining, and taking your laptop to the park and using the park as a writing space is something that can be done much more often than, say, where I live in Illinois, where it might be sunny and then start raining 5 minutes later.
Yeah, and I'm actually originally from Texas, from East Texas in Houston area, and I was like, I know about that. Like, it rains plenty there. But yeah, we've recently moved to Arizona, and yeah, a lot of sunny days here. It does get hot, of course, but a lot of sunny days here. Don't have to worry about the rain as much.
Now, I'm going to ask these questions. I'm going to try to not insult your Christian faith at all. I am an atheist,
okay.
But as you're a scientifically minded Christian, how do you approach hard questions like, just to give one example, biological evolution?
So over the past year, I've actually been writing a book dealing with evolution. And it's not finished yet. I'm not sure when I'm going to publish it. I've been reading all kinds of things, from materialists such as Richard Dawkins. I've been reading the hardcore stuff by the hardcore creationists like Ken Ham, and some of the less hardcore creationists like Michael Behe or Michael Behe, whatever. I don't know how to pronounce his name. And it's been very illuminating, very fun. And it's kind of hard to summarize my feelings on the matter. But the first thing I would say is that the problem with materialism, and when I say materialism, I mean philosophical materialism, not moral materialism. I mean materialism in the sense of saying that there is nothing beyond what we perceive as the material world, that kind of materialism. The problem with that, and by extension, the idea that the universe is just a deterministic machine, is that there isn't really any space for there to be a purpose for anything. You can never say that there's a purpose for anything. And if that is the case, then it doesn't really even matter whether or not we believe in lies like simplistic creationism. Like, so what if people believe that God created the world 6,000 years ago? It doesn't matter. Because you can only say that it matters based on a sense of a purpose for human life. But if there is no purpose, which materialism implies, then it doesn't matter if people believe these lies, right? But now from a Christian perspective, I recognize the facts. We share a common ancestor with apes. And this world is not 6,000 years old. It is very old. So, and I do believe that Adam and Eve were real people, but I do not believe that they were the first Homo sapiens in this world. And I do not believe that every aspect of the narrative in the Bible is literally true exactly as written. And I don't need that to be the case, because the Bible is not my God. I do not worship the Bible.
Now,
and I could give a more detailed response, but I don't think you want me to do that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Now, as a Christian, how do you approach common fantasy tropes and elements like polytheism and magic that are either at odds or might be seen at odds with the traditional Christian philosophy?
Yeah, so I am not writing for your for your kind of one-dimensional church lady. The stereotypical church lady person. You know what I'm talking about when I say church lady,
Yeah.
like the yeah. Okay, that's not that kind of person is afraid of his or her own imagination, because that kind of person has trouble distinguishing between their religion and their imagination. And so that person doesn't like to read fantasy. And I'm not writing for that person. Now, I do approach these things kind of carefully as a fantasy writer, but I recognize two things. First, it is fantasy, so from the beginning I'm going to be writing things that I don't believe, whether you're a Christian or atheist or whatever. If you're writing fantasy, you're writing stuff you don't actually believe. That's okay. It doesn't that aspect of it doesn't matter. Secondly, the contradictions that people may see aren't necessarily there. For example, if I have gods in my writing, well, what does that mean? What is a god? Is a god does God mean the ultimate reality, the supreme being of the universe, or does it just mean a being kind of more powerful than myself? Now, those are two different things, right? And the approach that I take in that sense is kind of similar to like Tolkien, the one that Tolkien took. Tolkien was very much a Catholic, but he had these other beings that were, he had Eru Ilúvatar, who's clearly the Christian god by another name, but then he had all these other beings who you could refer to as gods, when they weren't really gods in the Christian sense. They are just other beings. They're just more powerful beings who were maybe immortal or whatever. But they had their flaws, they had their strengths and their weaknesses. And in that way, in my books, and you see other people like for example, Brandon Sanderson is another fantasy writer. He's of my faith, and he does the same things. He has these powerful beings who you may refer to as gods, but they aren't really like the God that I worship, right? And I don't really see the problem there. I think is a problem of language rather than belief. Like, we're talking about two different concepts.
Yeah, and as an atheist, I would probably be asked how I would approach, like, say, the afterlife, which is an element commonly associated with many different religions, but it's not something I believe in personally.
Right.
And I would view it as, well, it's something I can use as like a literary element or a literary device independently of my own beliefs.
Right. And I mean, in atheists too, you're going to write things, you're going to write about a world that doesn't exist, and in this world you're going to include things that you don't believe exist. You put it there because it makes a good story, right?
Yeah.
That's it. And a lot of atheists will tell you, well, I don't believe in God, but you know what? It would be kind of cool if there were gods. Someone write a story about that. So and from a writer's perspective, if that's the real question is are you writing a good story, and also, are you making the world a little better with your writing? I think like that's a very serious thing for me, and it doesn't mean that I approach writing like I don't go to write a book and say, okay, what moral lesson do I want to teach here? No, I don't start with that. But I do it because I want to tell a good story. But when we write, the things that we do with our lives should make the world a little better. If not, then what are you doing, right? And if I can make the world a little better by telling a fantasy story that includes some things that aren't literally true, then okay, I'll do that.
Now, I do have one last question. According to your Podmatch page, you are fluent in Chinese in addition to English. Now, as the Chinese language has many varieties with widely varying levels of mutual intelligibility within the Chinese language, What varieties or dialects of Chinese are you fluent in?
Oh, I only speak Mandarin. Yeah, I only speak Mandarin. I can understand a little bit of some of the other dialects sometimes, but I would compare it to like I also speak Spanish, but I can understand. I can kind of understand when someone speaks Italian. A little bit. I get words here and there because there are similarities. And it's kind of the same thing, like between Mandarin and Cantonese, or Mandarin and Min. Like sometimes I'll pick up some words here and there, but I don't really understand them. But I mostly just understand Mandarin.
Well, Ronald, you were a very insightful guest, and I thank you for appearing on the Heartland Author Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Aaron.
For a limited time, Den of the Wolfman is available in ebook format for free, and I'll post a link to where you can get Den of the Wolfman for free in the text description of this episode. Ronald was a wonderful guest, and I hope you download Den of the Wolfman while it's still free. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination and never be afraid of your own imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at authoraac and on Instagram at aacscribe. Copyright 2022, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.